Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this final segment of today's show, we're going to discuss Iraq, and a lot has been happening. So let's get through the list if we can very quickly. Even though back in early November, in fact, the Prime Minister had spoken of resigning, he has now officially said that he will do so. And there have been celebrations in some quarters about the fact that Adil Abdul Mahdi will be stepping down as Prime Minister of Iraq after, of course, we know these many weeks of protests that have been taking place in that country. Then we have, of course, the attack that's taken place on the Iranian consulate in Najaf, and Iranian interests have been attacked elsewhere in the country as well. What does this say about anger towards Iran in Iraq? Also, we know the numbers of those being killed in Iraq, or have been killed so far, are quite high. I mean, since October the 1st, the estimates are about 350 people have been killed since protesters took to the streets, of course, to decry corruption and the many other grievances that they have towards the sitting government right now. Then we also have Ayatollah Sistani, who is essentially the chief religious person within Iraq at this point in time, and he's spoken about obviously, warning the government about the violence and the violence on its part towards protesters, I should say, and clarify. He's also spoken about an enemy plot, quote unquote, to seek to create civil strife, bringing back an era of dictatorship. That was part, of course, of his statement. There is a longer statement there, which I'm sure we'll discuss with our guests as well. Joining us from London is Dara Salam, who is teaching fellow in the Department of Politics and International Studies at SOAS University of London. He's written on Middle East politics as well as political theory. Joining us from Basra in Iraq is Al-Rubai, who is a journalist based in Iraq. His writing focuses on a variety of issues, including, in part, politics, wars, and human rights. And joining us from Doha is Zaydun Al-Kinani, who is a political analyst and writer. He specializes in geopolitics and identity politics with a primary focus on Iraq and the Middle East. Zaydun, Azhar, and Dara, thank you to all three of you for your time today. Dara, let me start with you. What do you make of the Iraqi Prime Minister's resignation? Is it enough?
Yeah, hi. Well, actually, the resignation of the Prime Minister comes a bit too late. He should have actually resigned when the death toll was mounting in protest. He's definitely responsible as a commander-in-chief of armed forces for the death occurred as a result of the peaceful demonstrations in Iraq, in many cities in Iraq, including Baghdad, Basra, Najaf, Nasiriyah, and others. So basically, I mean, the resignation should be considered as a win for the protesters, but that doesn't mean actually a huge change has happened. The protesters are actually demanding a change of the system rather than of one man. So the real question is whether actually the resignation of the Prime Minister will lead to any change. So by change, I mean a radical change of the political system, because that's what's at stake at the moment, in what's happening in Iraq.
Okay, so Azhar, tell us what are your thoughts sitting in Iraq? What does the resignation of Adil Abdul Mahdi mean? Does it mean that the system will change?
I'm totally agree with Dara what he mentions before, but I think so. What makes Abdul Mahdi to resign and to announce his resignation is after killing and injuring thousands of people in Iraq. That make a strong pressure on Abdul Mahdi to announce and declare his resignation. But I think the announcing of the Abdul Mahdi resignation didn't guarantee the protesters to send them back home. You know, it's just a beginning of the forms that the protesters demand since October 1st. Right. I think it's the start of the new conflict and a new challenge to the Iraqis. Why? Because the Iraqis are demanding and asking for the political system change and radical change across and all the cabinet, all the politicians in Iraq. And Abdul Mahdi, he just represents 1% out of the political class in the government. So the protesters across Iraq from Basra to the Najaf and Baghdad still continuing protesting until their demand are met.
Zaydoun, what are your thoughts about this based system that is in Iraq? Many people say that that essentially just allows certain individuals and groups to enrich themselves and expand their influence without any, of course, accountability.
Of course, the ethnic sectarian quota was a system that was installed in the country to drive people's attention away from the actual shortcomings, the actual governmental shortcomings towards the public services in the country, towards the very little development that we have witnessed in Iraq since 2003, towards the sectarian, political, militant policies and environment that was built across the country since the US-led invasion. Without being repetitive, from my colleagues about this is not enough and the revolution is not against one figurehead but against an entire system, which I totally agree with. I think focusing a bit on the details is that we need to focus on how the massacres in Nasiriyah was either going to start an armed conflict or was either going to achieve one of the symbolic achievements that happened, and that's the resignation of Adil Abdul Mahdi, the Prime Minister. It might not be the end goal. It might not be enough because Adil Abdul Mahdi, as I mentioned, is 1% of the entire political system, but it at least shows that the pressures, the pressure of the peaceful protesters has been achieved. It's pressuring the government. Focusing on the Iranian element that you mentioned, the anti-Iran sentiment in the discourse of the Iraqi protest movement since early October is actually one of the main elements. When Iraqi protesters attack Iranian official buildings, they're not necessarily just focusing on Iran in itself, but Iran is a part of the bigger picture of the political system in Iraq. Iran is the regional factor that is supporting that regime in Iraq. Iran is a part of the Iraqi government. When Iraqis attack the Iranian consulate or any Iranian official building in Basra or Najaf or Karbala, they are attacking the Iraqi government. It's a collective attack.
That's an interesting point. Dara, I wonder what your thoughts are about that when it comes to the Iranian influence, because I imagine, and I'm not defending the Iranians, but I'm just playing devil's advocate here, that the Iranians would argue, listen, the quota system that has been brought in and is the system currently in place in Iraq, it's not like the Iranians brought that system in. That was the system brought in after the U.S. got involved in Iraq after 2003. So that's not the Iranians' fault, is it?
That's absolutely right. So the current system, which is called the muhassasa system or the apportionment system, is actually installed by the U.S. Administration back in 2003, and that was actually meant to recognize all different minorities and sects and religions. So in itself, I mean, that system should actually be in a way working according to some kind of an egalitarian system. But that actually backfired in the sense that it led to more sectarian entrenchments, and also obviously, I mean, that the majority could devour the minority, and this is the real problem. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work in this way. So there must be other guarantees if you install such a system. I mean, the guarantees cannot be only done by a written constitution, but also by the institutions. So how to build political, social, and economic institutions of the state that could guarantee those kind of rights and liberties. So that's why actually it didn't work at all in Iraq. And as we saw, I mean, this led to external powers like Iran, for example, or regional powers to interfere in the affairs of Iraq. And the protesters are very angry with Iran because of the reason that actually they see all the militias who are responsible for killing all these people and the security services, obviously, as proxies of the Iranian regime. So Iran has a major influence in Iraq, and to be clear about this, Iran is in a kind of a power struggle with the U.S. in Iraq, and as we see, Iran has an upper hand actually in Iraq in terms of running the politics and running the political domain in Iraq.
All right, so Azhar, I wanted to, on the issue, the sectarian system as well that is in place, the key religious figure in the country, Azhar Ayatollah Sistani, has always been fairly critical of, in fact, governments in Iraq, ever since he's been speaking out through his Friday sermons in Karbala and otherwise. What do you make of his latest statements when it comes to the need for electoral reforms? He's spoken about election reforms. That was a previous sermon. But he's also then spoken about and warned the country about enemy plots to create further civil strife and to bring back possibly an era of dictatorship. What does that warning mean, do you think, for Iraqis?
As usual, the Marja'iyya in Najaf every Friday they talk about what the challenges that might Iraq face in the future. But I didn't think so. They mean that the dictatorship will come back, but they just warn. They would like to warn the politicians in the government that if you didn't address the people and protesters' demand, we will just kick you out of the government. Just warning, just verbal warning to the government to achieve what protesters demanding since October 1. But I think the Marja'iyya and the Najaf Ashraf, the last Friday, they just stress on its speech just to make the politicians be aware and realize that the Iraqis, they can't stand them to be more in the seats and in their politician seats. That's why the Abdel Mahdi now announced his resignation to be out of the government. But I think the most challenging thing is not Abdel Mahdi resignation right now, but who is the alternative who will be after Abdel Mahdi. It will take longer time to approve the Abdel Mahdi resignation now in the parliament, and then who will be the alternative. I think the alternative one who will be from the same faces of the parties right now. The Prime Minister seat is very important to the parties in the Iraq and the Iranian-backed militias inside Iraq. So that's why the conflict and the protest will be escalated more than it's now. I think it will take very, very, very longer and a few coming months to achieve all that.
Okay, so I'll give the final word to Zaidun. Zaidun, what are your thoughts on Sistani's warning and his entire role really in all of this? Because it seems that he is, as I said in my earlier question to Azhar, being critical of the government on all the legitimate, of course, grievances of the people at the same time. But at the same time, this warning then sort of confuses at least me.
Well, that's the problem with Sistani's warning or criticism of the government. He would criticize the government on one hand, but then at the same time he would warn the Iraqi people about the uncertain future if this regime leaves, and that puts him in a very neutral position between the protesters and the government. And this is one of the main reasons why the Marja'iyya, which is the religious establishment in Iraq, is one of the main institutions in Iraq that lost a lot of popularity from the Shia component of the society before the rest of the components of the Iraqi society in this revolution. It's an uprising against the Iraqi reality, which includes the regime, the militias, the external factors, corruption, sectarianism, and the religious establishment, whether they have militias on the ground or whether they don't have, such as Sistani's Marja'iyya. So this is a revolution against everyone and everything, and we're fine. And this is regardless of the outcomes or the aftermath of Adil Abdel Mahdi's resignation. One minimal disagreement I would have with my colleague Azhar is that we shouldn't worry about who comes after Adil Abdel Mahdi, because if it is the same political parties from the ethnic sectarian quota that would appoint the next prime minister, then the revolution did not achieve anything, and they shouldn't even celebrate this symbolic achievement. The protest movement in Iraq is against the system and against the parliament that Adil Abdel Mahdi gave his resignation to replace him.
Very well. We'll leave that as our final word, but of course appreciate all of our guests for their time and of course their insight. And no doubt we'll be visiting this issue in the coming days as well, because this is certainly not over. Zaydoun was speaking to us there from Doha, Azhar was speaking to us from Basra, and Dara was speaking to us there from London. Viewers, the situation in Iraq is certainly a complex one because of the system that has been put in place ever since the U.S., of course, invaded that country in 2003. Quota system, a sectarian system, one can argue possibly similar to what's the situation in Lebanon as well, with a sectarian system there, which just creates this vacuum and it allows for corruption to almost just fester within these systems. The Iraqis, of course, protesting against the entire system. So it's not just Adil Abdel Mahdi leaving and everything just falls into place magically. It's not about that one man. It was about what he represented and why he then was forced to resign by the people. Then we have this ominous, warning on the part of Ayatollah Sistani, the key religious figure in the country, as well, about enemy plots and creating strife and possible era of dictatorship being brought back, etc. That a bit of a confusing statement, if I'm honest. And then, of course, there's the Iranian role in Iraq, which many Iraqis are now becoming increasingly critical of. Is that fair? The Iranians, of course, would argue, as I'd put to Dara as well, that it wasn't them that brought in the sectarian system. They're sort of just taking advantage of it because it was sort of handed to them on a silver platter. We'll get back to this, of course, as I said, in coming days, but I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.